The night Benji Floros told his wife she wasn't worth the dirt beneath his Ferragamo loafers was the same night Suna Luz stopped being his and became everyone else's obsession. The Connecticut estate dripped with old money and older secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors that had witnessed generations of Floros celebrations, each more extravagant than the last. Zune stood in the corner of the ballroom wearing the beige dress her mother-in-law had selected, a creation so aggressively modest it managed to erase her entirely. The fabric hung like a shroud, swallowing her curves and rendering her invisible among the peacocking guests who wore their wealth like armor. She watched Benji work the room with the effortless charisma that had once convinced her she was special. His hand rested on the lower back of Thessaly Ivanova, a Greek shipping heiress whose family fortune had survived wars and revolutions. Thessaly laughed at something Benji whispered, her head tilting back to expose a throat adorned with diamonds that could fund a small country. The gesture was practiced, perfect, designed to showcase both the jewelry and the woman wearing it. Soon had seen this performance before. She'd watched it play out at a dozen events over the past year, each repetition carving away another piece of whatever hope she'd been foolish enough to harbor. She approached with 2 champagne flutes, thinking perhaps this time would be different, that he might acknowledge her presence with something other than dismissal. "I thought you might want a drink," she said, her voice barely audible over the string quartet playing something expensive and forgettable. Benji's eyes slid past her as though she were part of the catering staff. Thessaly accepted a glass from a passing waiter, her smile precisely calibrated to wound. "You're still here?" Thessaly's accent turned the question into an art form, each syllable dripping with aristocratic disdain. How devoted! The other guests in their circle shifted uncomfortably. Some had the decency to look away. Most watched with the hungry fascination of people witnessing an execution they'd heard rumors about but never expected to see. Thessaly excused herself with a knowing smirk, her departure creating a vacuum that should have allowed for intimacy. Instead, the space between Suna and her husband felt wider than continents. "Can we leave?" Suna touched his arm, hating the pleading quality that had crept into her voice. "I'm not feeling well." Benji turned to her then, really looked at her for the first time all evening, and the coldness in his eyes made her blood freeze in her veins. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear, his words chosen with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage. "You think I want to be seen leaving with you?" His voice was low, intimate, the tone he might use to whisper endearments, but twisted into cruelty. "You think any man here would trade places with me? Look at yourself, Suna, really look." She did. Caught her reflection in one of the gilt-framed mirrors that lined the walls. Saw what he saw, a woman drowning in beige fabric, her natural hair tamed into submission, her face bare of the dramatic makeup the other women wore like war paint. "You're not worth my touch," Benji continued, each word landing like a physical blow. "You never were. My father insisted on this charitable gesture after your family's company collapsed. He thought it would be good optics, marrying the daughter of a failed businessman. A mercy, he called it. But charity has limits, and mine ran out long ago." The champagne glass slipped from Soon's fingers. The sound of crystal shattering against Italian marble cut through the music, through the conversation, through everything. 300 guests turned to stare. The quartet faltered mid-phrase. Soon stood in the spreading puddle of champagne and broken glass, the liquid seeping into the hem of her beige dress, staining it gold. She waited for tears to come, for humiliation to overwhelm her, for some emotional response that matched the magnitude of what had just happened. Nothing came. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Something cold and sharp taking root where her heart used to be, spreading through her chest like ice crystallizing in water. Clarity arrived with brutal simplicity. She had been performing a role in someone else's play, and the performance was over. Benji walked away without looking back, his shoulders straight, his gait unhurried. He rejoined Thessaly on the far side of the ballroom, accepting a fresh drink, laughing at something someone said. The party resumed. The quartet found their rhythm again. Conversations picked up where they'd left off. Soon stood alone in the puddle, glass shards glittering around her feet like fallen stars. A server approached with a towel and a dustpan, murmuring apologies as though the broken glass were his fault. She moved aside, let him clean up the mess, and walked out of the ballroom with her head high and her spine straight. The October night bit at her skin as she stood on the steps leading down to the circular drive where dozens of luxury cars waited. A valet approached, asking if she needed her vehicle, and she shook her head because she didn't trust herself to speak yet. The words were still echoing in her skull. Not worth my touch. Never were. Charity has limits. She walked to her car herself, found it parked in the back lot where the staff vehicles lived, because, of course, Benji hadn't wanted her car visible near the entrance. The key fob trembled in her hand as she unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and sat in darkness. This was the moment in every story where the humiliated wife would cry, would call her mother or her best friend, and sob about how cruel her husband had been, how unfair life was, how she didn't deserve this treatment. Soon did none of those things. Instead, she drove. Through winding Connecticut roads that turned into highways, highways that turned into city streets, streets that eventually delivered her to the Manhattan building where her father had once ruled an empire before the Floros family orchestrated its systematic destruction. She parked across the street and stared up at the dark windows of the executive floors. Her father had died believing he'd failed, had died thinking his company collapsed because of his own mistakes, never knowing that Alexandros Floros had spent years undermining him through market manipulation and carefully orchestrated sabotage. Her mother had told her the truth only after the funeral, when grief made secrets impossible to keep. The marriage had been part of it, the final humiliation. Alexandros, forcing his son to marry the daughter of the defeated enemy, binding the families together in a grotesque parody of alliance. Soon he had believed Benji when he'd courted her, when he'd spoken of building something different from their father's legacy, when he'd promised partnership instead of domination. She'd been young enough to believe in promises. But as she sat in the darkness, she remembered something else. A moment 3 months into their marriage, when she'd walked into Benji's study unannounced and found him staring at a photograph of his father, tears streaming down his face. When he'd noticed her, the tears had vanished instantly, replaced by the cold mask he always wore. "What do you want?" he'd asked, his voice harsh. "I just wanted to see if you needed anything. I don't need anything from you. Leave." She'd left, but she'd seen something in that moment. A glimpse of a man trapped by expectations he'd never learned to question, destroying himself and everyone around him in service to a dead man's approval. It didn't excuse what he'd done tonight. Nothing could excuse it, but it suggested that the cruelty wasn't just malice. It was learned behavior so deeply ingrained he didn't know how to stop it, even when it was destroying his own life. Dawn broke over Manhattan in shades of gold and pink, painting the skyscrapers in colors that suggested hope and new beginnings. Soon watched the sun rise through her windshield and made a series of decisions that would reshape everything. She wouldn't cry. Tears were for mourning, and she wasn't mourning anything. She was excavating something that had been buried for years. The woman her father had raised, the daughter who'd inherited his mind for strategy and her grandmother's spine of steel. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts until she found the name she needed. Viktor Petrov, her father's former business partner, the one who'd disappeared after the company fell, the one who'd sent flowers to the funeral with a card that read, "When you're ready to fight, call me." The phone rang 4 times, then 5. She was about to hang up when a voice answered, rough with sleep and caution. "Do you know what time it is?"
"Victor."
"It's Sunalus." A pause. "I know who you are. What do you want?" I need to see you tomorrow. It's about my father and the Floros family. Another long pause. I'll think about it. The line went dead. Soon stared at the phone, feeling the first tremor of doubt. She'd assumed Victor would help, that her father's old allies would rally to her cause. The silence on the other end suggested she'd been naive. She started the car and drove home to the Connecticut estate, arriving just as the cleaning crew was erasing all evidence of the gala. The broken champagne glass was gone. The ballroom gleamed as though nothing had happened, but everything had happened. Soon walked through the house to the bedroom wing she'd occupied alone for months, packed a single bag with essentials, and left without looking back. She checked into a Manhattan hotel under her maiden name and sent a single text to Benji. "Thank you for setting me free." His response came within minutes, 3 question marks. And though he couldn't comprehend what she meant, she turned off her phone and stood at the hotel window overlooking Central Park, watching joggers and dog walkers and people living ordinary lives. She'd been one of them once, before she'd confused love with surrender, before she'd let someone else's opinion define her worth. Never again. The woman who'd worn the beige dress and stood in a puddle of broken glass was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone dangerous, someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't destruction from outside, but transformation from within. Benji Floros had no idea what he'd unleashed, but he would learn, slowly and painfully, that the wife he'd dismissed as worthless was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. Chapter 2. The Resurrection. Soon didn't sleep for 3 days. Sleep was for people who had time to waste, and she'd already wasted 3 years pretending to be small enough to fit into Benji's idea of acceptable. The hotel suite became her war room, room service trays stacked outside the door, her laptop screen glowing blue in the darkness as she rebuilt herself from the ground up. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts until she found the name she needed. Viktor Petrov, her father's former business partner, the one who'd promised to help when she was ready to fight. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, rough with sleep and something else. Recognition. Sooner you called. I wasn't sure you actually would. I'm ready to destroy the Floros family. I need your help. Silence stretched across the line. Then no, the word hit her like cold water. What? I said no. I've spent 5 years rebuilding my life after what Alexandros did to us. I have a consulting firm now, clients who depend on me, a reputation I've worked hard to establish. Getting involved in your revenge would jeopardize all of that. Soon felt panic rising in her chest. She'd planned everything around having Victor as an ally. Without his expertise, his knowledge of her father's business, his connections. Please, she said, hating how the word sounded. My father trusted you. He would have wanted. Your father is dead, Victor interrupted not unkindly, and using his memory to manipulate me won't work. I loved him like a brother, but I'm not throwing away everything I've built for a widow's vendetta. He hung up before she could respond. Soon sat in the hotel room staring at her phone, the first crack appearing in her armor of certainty. She'd assumed Victor would help, assumed her father's old partners would rally to her cause out of loyalty or guilt or some sense of justice. She'd been wrong. For 2 days she made calls. Former employees of her father's company, people who'd been laid off when the business collapsed, anyone who might have reason to want revenge on the Floros family. Most didn't answer. Those who did made excuses. They'd moved on, had families to support, couldn't risk antagonizing powerful people. One man, her father's former head of operations, was more direct. Your father was a good man who got destroyed by people with more money and fewer scruples. I'm sorry that happened, but I'm not interested in being collateral damage in whatever you're planning. The rejections accumulated like bruises. Sune started to understand that the world didn't owe her justice, that other people's survival instincts were stronger than their sense of loyalty to a dead man's daughter. On the 4th night, Drunk on wine and desperation, she called Victor again. "I was wrong to ask you to risk everything," she said before he could hang up. "I was wrong to use my father's memory as leverage. But I need to know, did Alexandros Floros destroy my father deliberately? Or am I inventing conspiracies to avoid accepting that he just failed?" Another long silence. Then Victor sighed, a sound that carried years of survivor's guilt. "Meet me tomorrow. I'll show you everything I have. But after that, you're on your own." They met at a cafe in Brooklyn, far from the circles where either of them might be recognized. Victor looked older than Suna remembered, his hair more grey than black, his face carrying lines that hadn't been there at her father's funeral. He slid a folder across the table. "This is everything I was able to document before I had to disappear. Bank transfers, emails, testimony from employees who were bribed or threatened. Alexandros didn't just outcompete your father, he systematically destroyed him." Suna opened the folder with shaking hands and saw the pattern laid out in documents: market manipulation, insider trading, witnesses who'd been paid to sabotage deals. The evidence was undeniable. "Why didn't you use this?" she asked. "Why didn't you expose him?" "Auntie, because I had a family to protect. Because lawyers cost money I didn't have. Because powerful people don't go down easy, and I didn't want to end up like your father, dead from stress before I hit 50. Victor's voice was flat with old pain. "I made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice, but it kept my daughters fed and my wife from having to bury me." Soon looked at this man who'd survived by staying silent, and something shifted in her understanding. Revenge wasn't a righteous crusade that people would naturally join. It was dangerous, costly, and most people were too smart to risk everything for it. "I'm not asking you to help me anymore," she said quietly. "But can I ask you a question? If you were me, what would you do?" Victor studied her for a long moment. "If I were you, I'd hire Rebecca Hayes. She's the only lawyer I know who's actually destroyed men like Benji Floros. Then I'd be patient. This isn't something you do in a few weeks. This takes months of careful planning, of building your position piece by piece. And you'll need to be prepared to lose things along the way. People will turn against you. Friends will abandon you. There will be moments when you question whether it's worth it. Is it worth it? That depends on whether you want justice or just want to hurt him back." Over the next 3 weeks, Suna rebuilt her approach. Instead of expecting people to drop everything for her cause, she had to prove she was worth the risk. The trust fund from her grandmother existed, but it wasn't the fortune she'd imagined. $2.8 million, and half of it was locked in investments she couldn't access for another 2 years without massive penalties. She liquidated what she could. $1.4 million in cash, plus the jewelry Benji had given her over the years that she'd never worn. The pieces sold at auction for another $300,000, $1.7 million total. Enough to survive for a while, not enough to buy an army. She started selling her skills instead. Her father had taught her financial analysis before he died, and those skills hadn't atrophied during her marriage. She'd simply stopped using them. She took freelance consulting work under a pseudonym, analyzing shipping contracts for smaller companies, earning $5,000 here, $10,000 there. The money was nothing compared to what she'd need, but it was hers, earned, not inherited. Rebecca Hayes' office didn't return her first 3 calls. When she finally got through, the receptionist informed her that Ms. Hayes' retainer was $200,000, and her calendar was booked for 6 months. Soon didn't have $200,000 to spend on a retainer. She had rent to pay, consultants to hire, shares to buy. She needed another approach. She researched every case Rebecca had won, every interview she'd given, every article written about her. Then she wrote a 30-page legal analysis of the Floros Industries corporate structure, identifying 17 specific vulnerabilities in Benji's position that could be exploited through shareholder rights and fiduciary duty laws. She included case precedents, documentation of similar successful challenges, and a proposed strategy timeline. She mailed it to Rebecca's office with a note. "I can't afford your retainer yet, but I can afford to pay you a percentage of what we win. If this analysis is worth your time, call me." 3 days later, her phone rang. "This is Rebecca Hayes. Your analysis is solid. Better than some of the work my associates produce." A pause. "I don't take contingency cases, but I'm willing to take a reduced retainer, 50,000 up front, plus 15% of any financial settlement or share value gained. Interested?" Soon calculated quickly. 50,000 would hurt, but it was doable. "Yeah, good. Come to my office tomorrow and bring everything you have on your husband." The physical transformation was harder than Suna had anticipated, and more expensive than her shrinking resources could easily bear. Harper Chen came recommended through Rebecca's network, but the consultation fee alone was $5,000. "I can't afford your full services," Soon told her during their first meeting, "but I can afford advice. Tell me what I need to change, give me a plan, and I'll execute it myself." Harper studied her with professional assessment. "Most of my clients want me to do the work for them. You're willing to put in the labor?" "I don't have a choice." "Then here's what you do." Harper pulled out a tablet and started sketching. "Your wardrobe is expensive but wrong. Stop trying to blend in with his world. Find your own style, bold colors, clean lines, nothing apologetic. Shop at consignment stores for designer pieces. You can build a powerful wardrobe for under 5,000 if you're strategic. Your hair needs to make a statement, not hide. YouTube has hundreds of tutorials for natural hairstyling. Learn them. Practice until you can do in 20 minutes what you've been paying a stylist 2 hours to achieve. Your posture is defensive. Walk like you're heading somewhere important, not like you're hoping no one notices you." Harper charged her for 1 hour of consultation instead of the full makeover package. "Come back in 2 weeks. Show me what you've done. If it's good, I'll give you the next phase of advice. Consider it an investment in watching someone actually do the work." Suna spent the next 2 weeks transforming herself on a budget. She watched videos until 3 in the morning, practiced walking in heels she bought second-hand, taught herself makeup techniques that created authority instead of prettiness. She shopped at vintage stores and consignment boutiques, building outfits that cost $200 but looked like $2,000. When she returned to Harper's office, the consultant circled her slowly, then smiled, genuinely this time, not professionally. "You did the work. Most people would have given up or found excuses why they needed me to do it for them. You figured it out." Harper pulled out her tablet again. "Here's phase 2, and Suna? I'm not charging you for this one. I want to see where this goes." The approach to Nathan Wellington was built on competence, not capital. Suna had met him once, briefly, at a conference 2 years ago. She'd kept his business card more out of habit than intention. She spent a week researching his company, analyzing his supply chains, identifying inefficiencies she could see from publicly available data. Then she wrote him a 20-page operational analysis showing how Wellington Maritime could reduce fuel costs by 11% and improve delivery times by 7% through route optimization and strategic port partnerships. She sent it with a simple note. "I found these opportunities in your public data. Imagine what I could find with access to your actual operations. If this is worth a meeting, call me." He called the next morning. They met at a restaurant in the financial district. Nathan arrived precisely on time, and when he saw her, transformed, self-made, ready for battle, his expression shifted from polite greeting to genuine interest. "Your analysis was impressive," he said, sitting across from her. "Where'd you learn shipping logistics?" "My father. He used to quiz me on route optimization when I was 12. I thought it was annoying then. Turns out it was an education, and you're offering to help me improve my operations out of the goodness of your heart?" "No, I'm offering a partnership. I'm making a play for control of Floros Industries. I need someone with your expertise and your integrity. In exchange, I can help you expand into markets that have been closed to you, leverage relationships I'm building, and provide strategic analysis that you're currently paying consultants a fortune to deliver." Nathan leaned back, studying her. What's in it for you? Everything I've lost. And the satisfaction of proving that the woman my husband dismissed as worthless can rebuild an empire better than he ever managed it. Justice or revenge? Both. Does it matter? It might. Nathan's expression was thoughtful. But I'll help you either way. Not because of what you're offering me, but because I met you 2 years ago at that conference and saw how your husband treated you. Like you were invisible. I'd been wondering when you'd realize you weren't. They talked for 3 hours. Nathan agreed to the partnership, but not because Soon was buying him. Because she'd proven she could deliver value. And because he believed in what she was trying to build. By the time Soona returned to her hotel that night, 6 weeks had passed since the gala. 6 weeks of rejection and setbacks, and small victories built on competence and determination rather than inherited wealth. She was tired in ways that went deeper than physical exhaustion, but she was also ready. She called Victor one last time. I have a lawyer who's taken me on contingency, an image consultant who's coaching me through transformation, and a business partner who believes in what I'm building. I still need someone who understands the financial side. Someone who can help me target the right shareholders, build the right case. I can't pay your full rate, but I can pay you per project. And I can offer you equity in whatever we build from this then define success. Benji, Floros removed, as CEO and me in control of enough. Shares to make sure he can never take it. Back as Victor was quiet for a long time. Your father would have been proud of you. Not because you're seeking revenge, but because you're doing it without selling yourself to anyone. All right, I'm in. Send me what you have, and I'll tell you what it's worth. Fair enough. Soon hung up and looked at her reflection in the hotel mirror. The woman staring back was harder than she'd been 6 weeks ago, more calculated, less naive. She'd learned that justice wasn't given freely. That transformation required more than good intentions. That winning meant being willing to sacrifice comfort and certainty for something that mattered more. The woman who'd worn beige and stood in puddles of broken glass was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone forged through rejection and setbacks and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Benji Floros had no idea what he'd unleashed, but he would learn slowly and painfully that the wife he'd dismissed as worthless had become something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. A woman who'd rebuilt herself from nothing and owed no one for the power she'd claimed. Chapter 3. The Invasion. The boardroom of Floros Industries smelled like old leather and older money. Soon arrived an hour before the scheduled meeting, before even the early arrivals typically showed up, because territory was claimed not just by presence, but by preparation. She chose the seat at the far end of the mahogany table, the one traditionally reserved for the largest external investor, a position that had been empty since Alexandros Floros died. The board secretary found her there at 7 in the morning, reviewing documents spread across the polished surface like a general studying maps before battle. The woman's surprise was visible but professional. Mrs. Floros, I didn't realize you'd be attending. I own 17% of this company now, Soon said without looking up. I have a legal right to attend any board meeting. Please update your attendance records accordingly. The secretary retreated and Soona knew the phone calls would start immediately. Benji would be notified. His mother would be alerted. The board members would arrive with questions and concerns. Perfect. She wanted them off balance. Victor arrived next, carrying a briefcase that contained the results of 2 weeks of forensic analysis. He took the seat to her right, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes held the gleam of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. Everything is ready, he said quietly. The numbers don't lie. Rebecca appeared at 7:30, her presence commanding immediate attention from the staff who were setting up coffee and pastries. She positioned herself to Soon's left, creating a unified front that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. Nathan entered at 7:45. drawing stares because his face wasn't familiar in these circles. He sat 3 seats down from Sune and nodded once, the gesture conveying solidarity without compromising her independence. The board members began arriving at 8. Their reactions to Sune's presence ranged from confusion to concern to barely concealed hostility. She met each gaze steadily, memorizing who looked away first and who held eye contact. Cataloguing allies and enemies, Benji arrived at exactly 8:15, fashionably late in the way that powerful men are always fashionably late. He walked into the boardroom mid-conversation with another board member and stopped dead when he saw his wife sitting in the power position at the opposite end of the table. "What is this?" His voice carried across the room, all pretense of civility abandoned. "What are you doing here?" Sune looked up from the document she'd been reviewing, her expression as placid as a lake before a storm. "Good morning, Benji. I'm attending the board meeting, as is my right as a major shareholder." "Shareholder?" He crossed to the board secretary, whose face had gone pale. "What is she talking about?" The secretary handed him a folder with trembling hands. Benji's face went through a series of expressions as he read: confusion, disbelief, rage. Sune watched with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. "You bought shares," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've been buying shares. 17% to be exact." Sune closed her folder and folded her hands on top of it. "I believe that makes me the 3rd largest stakeholder in this company, after you and your mother. Shall we begin the meeting?" Benji looked around the room as though expecting someone to explain how this had happened, how his invisible wife had suddenly become undismissible. His mother, Isadora, sat at the head of the table, watching the entire exchange with an expression that revealed nothing. "Begin the meeting," Isadora said calmly. "We have business to conduct." The agenda item was Benji's proposal to acquire Castellanos Shipping, a move he'd been planning for months and had presented to the board as a done deal. He'd spent the past weeks negotiating terms, had already celebrated the acquisition at dinners with executives, had ordered champagne for a victory party planned for next week. He stood at the head of the table and began his presentation, but his usual confidence was rattled. He kept glancing at Sune, as though she might disappear if he looked away and back again. The numbers he presented sounded impressive if you didn't examine them closely. Market expansion, revenue projections, strategic positioning in Mediterranean trade routes. Benji watched himself present, and part of him, the part that still functioned independently of his father's voice in his head, recognized that everything Sune was about to say would be correct. He'd known Castellanos Shipping had problems. His own analysts had warned him about the environmental violations, the outdated fleet, the CEO's legal troubles. But his father had always said that real men took risks, that caution was for the weak, that aggressive expansion was the only way to maintain dominance. So Benji had pushed forward with an acquisition that every rational part of him knew was problematic, because backing down would have meant admitting weakness. When he finished, the board members shifted in their seats, waiting for the usual rubber stamp, the expected approval that had characterized every meeting for the past 5 years. Sune raised her hand. "I have concerns about this acquisition," she said clearly. "With the board's permission, I'd like to present an alternative analysis." Benji's face went red. "This meeting isn't a forum for amateurs to practice their—" "Mrs. Floros owns 17% of this company," Rebecca interrupted smoothly. "She has every right to present alternative proposals, unless you'd like me to cite the specific bylaws that guarantee this right." Isadora leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to hear what my daughter-in-law has to say." "Continue, Sune." Sune stood, and the transformation was complete. The woman in the purple suit bore no resemblance to the invisible wife in beige. She moved to the presentation screen with the confidence of someone who'd been born to command rooms like this, who'd inherited the right to speak and be heard. Castellanos shipping is failing, she began, pulling up a slide that showed financial data Victor had obtained through entirely legal channels. Their fleet is outdated. They're violating environmental regulations in 3 countries. Their CEO is under investigation for embezzlement. Acquiring them would expose Floros Industries to massive liability. She clicked through slides that revealed the rot beneath Castellanos' glossy surface. Every claim was backed by documentation, by photographs of rusting vessels, by testimony from port officials, by financial statements that showed hemorrhaging money hidden behind creative accounting. Furthermore, Suna continued, this acquisition would cost us significantly more than projected once you factor in the inevitable lawsuits, the required upgrades to meet environmental standards, and the loss of clients who are moving towards sustainable shipping practices. Benji tried to interrupt. Those concerns are overblown. Every company faces... I'm not finished. Soon's voice cut through his objection like a blade. I have an alternative proposal that would cost 40% less and yield significantly higher returns. She pulled up new slides showing Wellington Maritime, Nathan's company, showcased in data and photographs that told the story of modern, efficient, environmentally conscious shipping. The numbers were undeniable. Newer vessels, cutting-edge technology, relationships with major clients who were demanding sustainable practices. Wellington Maritime represents the future of this industry, Soon said, making eye contact with each board member in turn. Acquiring them would position Floros Industries as an industry leader in sustainable shipping. We'd gain access to new markets, particularly in the Pacific region, where growth is exploding. And we'd do it at a fraction of the cost, with none of the liability. She presented projected revenue streams, environmental impact assessments, testimonials from clients promising increased contracts if Floros went green. Victor had helped her prepare every number, and Nathan had provided insider knowledge about market trends that Benji had completely missed. When she finished, the silence in the boardroom was absolute. Board members were leaning forward, studying the slides with genuine interest instead of the polite boredom they'd shown during Benji's presentation. This is insane, Benji said finally. You want us to abandon a deal I've been negotiating for months in favor of some company nobody's ever heard of? I've heard of them, said Stellan Voss, one of the board's most influential members. They're revolutionizing sustainability standards. If we don't move on this, our competitors will. The environmental angle alone is worth considering, another board member added. Our clients are asking for greener options. We've been putting them off for years. Isadora hadn't spoken since giving Suna permission to present. Now she cleared her throat, and everyone turned to listen. I vote in favor of Soon's proposal, she said simply. All those in favor? Hands went up around the table. One by one, board members chose the future over Benji's pride. When the count was finished, the vote was unanimous, except for Benji and 3 loyalists who refused to raise their hands. Motion passes, Isadora announced. We'll begin acquisition talks with Wellington Maritime immediately. Meeting adjourned. The boardroom emptied slowly, members approaching Suna to shake her hand, to express surprise at her analysis, to ask where she'd been hiding this competence all these years. She accepted their compliments with grace, while internally noting which ones were genuine and which were merely hedging their bets. Benji remained at his end of the table, staring at the presentation screen, where Soon's slides still glowed. When the room finally cleared except for the 2 of them, he spoke without looking at her. My father arranged our marriage because he felt guilty about destroying your father. Did you know that? He was dying, and guilt made him sentimental. He thought binding our families would somehow make up for what he'd done. I know, Suna said quietly. I've always known. And you married me anyway. I married you because I was young enough to believe people could be different from their parents. I was wrong. Benji finally turned to face her, and for the first time since the gala, she saw something other than arrogance in his expression. Confusion, maybe. The beginnings of understanding that he'd fundamentally miscalculated. "What do you want, Soon? Revenge?" She gathered her documents, took her time responding. "I want what I've always wanted. Respect, recognition. The right to exist in spaces that men like you think belong exclusively to you. The difference is, now I'm not asking for permission." She walked out of the boardroom without looking back, knowing he was watching her leave, knowing the foundation of his world had just developed cracks he couldn't ignore. Chapter 4. The Coronation. The Metropolitan Museum Gala honoring contemporary African art was the kind of event where Manhattan's elite went to be seen rather than to see. Zune had attended it before, always on Benji's arm, always wearing whatever he deemed appropriate, always standing slightly behind him while he networked with people he considered important. This year, she arrived alone. The car service dropped her at the museum's entrance precisely on time. She stepped out wearing a custom gown in deep purple created by an emerging Senegalese designer Harper had discovered during research. The fabric moved like water, catching light and throwing it back in ways that made photography necessary. Her natural hair was styled in an elaborate crown of coils, each one perfectly formed, decorated with small gold beads that caught the flash of cameras. The photographers went wild. "Mrs. Floros, over here. Sooner. Who are you wearing?" "Mrs. Floros, is it true you're now on the Floros Industries board?" She paused at the top of the steps, knowing the photographs being taken would run in tomorrow's society pages, knowing Benji would see them and understand that she'd become exactly what he'd once tried to prevent: visible. Inside, the museum had been transformed into a showcase of contemporary African artists whose work commanded prices that made even billionaires hesitate. Soon moved through the galleries with genuine interest, stopping to study pieces that spoke to her, ignoring the whispers that followed her like a wave. "Is that really her? I heard she humiliated Benji at a board meeting last week. She looks completely different. What happened?" Nathan found her standing in front of a massive canvas depicting Lagos at sunset, skyscrapers rising from orange and gold brushstrokes. He appeared beside her without announcement, his presence comfortable rather than intrusive. "This artist is incredible," Nathan observed, studying the canvas. "Have you been to Lagos?" "Never," Suna admitted. "My father talked about it often. He had business partners there before everything fell apart. You should come visit. See what the future looks like." They moved through the galleries together, and Suna was acutely aware of how people watched them. Nathan was striking in his tailored suit, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd built his success from nothing and owed no one. Together they made a picture that suggested possibilities, that made powerful men uncomfortable. Benji was somewhere in the museum with Thessaly. Zuna had seen them arrive from her position near a sculpture garden, had watched Thessaly's face when she spotted Suna across the crowd. The Greek heiress's expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to something closer to concern, which was satisfying in ways Suna hadn't expected. The confrontation came during cocktails before the formal program. Soon was accepting champagne from a passing waiter when Thessaly materialized beside her, close enough that their conversation would be private, but visible enough that everyone would notice it happening. "That's a bold choice," Thessaly said, gesturing to Soon's gown. "Purple. Some might call it desperate for attention." Suna took a sip of champagne, taking her time before responding. "And some might call beige a desperate attempt to disappear." "I'm done disappearing." Thessaly's smile sharpened. "Benji tells me you've been causing trouble, buying shares like a woman playing at business. It's adorable, really. How generous of you to find my financial independence adorable. I find your continued pursuit of a married man tragic, but we all have different standards." The words landed like slaps. Thessaly's face flushed red beneath her expertly applied makeup, her composure cracking just enough to show the rage underneath. But then something shifted in her expression, vulnerability replacing venom for just a moment. "You think you're the only one who's been dismissed by men like Benji?" Thessaly's voice dropped low enough that only Suna could hear. "I've spent 15 years being told I'm decorative, that my family's fortune is interesting, but I'm not. That I should be grateful for male attention, because what else do women like me have to offer?" The confession caught Suna off guard. She'd expected cruelty, not kinship. "Then why fight me?" Suna asked. "Why not help me prove that women like us are more than decoration?" "Because you're proving it by destroying a man publicly. That doesn't change the system, it just makes one example." Thessaly's voice carried a weariness that suggested she'd thought about this extensively. "When the dust settles, powerful men will use your victory as evidence that women are vindictive, emotional, unfit for leadership. They'll tighten their grip, not loosen it." Before Soon could respond, Nathan returned with fresh drinks and an expression that suggested he'd heard every word of the exchange. "Mrs. Varnava," he said with exquisite politeness. "I've been hoping to speak with you. I'm Nathan Wellington. Your family's shipping company recently lost a major contract to one of our subsidiaries. I wanted to thank you for the business." Thessaly's face went from red to white. She turned without responding and disappeared into the crowd, her exit swift enough to signal defeat. "That was cruel," Suna observed. "She insulted you. I don't tolerate people insulting my business partners. Is that what I am? Your business partner?" Nathan looked at her with those intelligent eyes that saw too much. "You're many things, Soon. My business partner is just the easiest to explain in public." Before she could respond, Kavya Sharma approached with the focused intensity of a journalist who'd spotted a story. The editor-in-chief of Prestige magazine was legendary in media circles, known for her ability to make or break reputations with a single feature. "Mrs. Floros," Kavya said without preamble, "I'd like to interview you for our Women Reshaping American Business issue. Would you be available next week?" Soon had prepared for this possibility. Harper had coached her on media strategy, on controlling narratives, on using publicity as a weapon rather than running from it. "I'd be happy to speak with you. Have your assistant contact mine to schedule." She said it as though she had an assistant, as though such things were natural and expected. Kavya's smile suggested she knew exactly what Suna was doing and approved completely. "Excellent. I think our readers will be very interested in your perspective on family businesses and the evolution of corporate leadership." The message was clear. Kavya wanted to tell the story of how Soon had risen from invisibility to power, and that story would reshape how society viewed the Floros family. The formal program began with speeches from artists and curators, followed by the announcement of the evening's honorees. Sune found her seat at a table near the front, positioned strategically where she could see and be seen. Nathan sat beside her, and Rebecca had materialized at some point during the evening to claim the seat on her other side. Across the ballroom, Benji sat at a different table with Thessaly, who was pointedly ignoring him in favor of conversation with a Swedish industrialist. Soon watched her husband watch her, saw the way his jaw tightened when Nathan leaned close to whisper something that made her laugh. The speeches droned on, but Suna was focused on something else, the way people approached her table during breaks, introducing themselves, requesting meetings, treating her like someone worth knowing. Board members from other companies, venture capitalists looking for investment opportunities. Society women who'd ignored her for years, suddenly fascinated by her transformation. "You're a sensation," Rebecca murmured during one such break. "They're calling you the boardroom queen on social media. The photographs from the entrance have gone viral." Soon pulled out her phone and scrolled through her mentions. Thousands of comments, most from women celebrating her apparent transformation. Articles being written in real time about her appearance, her rumored role in the Wellington maritime acquisition, speculation about trouble in the Floros marriage. This is what you wanted, yes? Nathan asked. To be seen. No, Soon corrected. I wanted to be undeniable. There's a difference. On the way out of the gala, Sune passed Benji in the museum's grand foyer. They hadn't spoken directly all evening, had maintained careful distance like opposing magnets. But in that moment, surrounded by crowds heading to after-parties and late dinners, they found themselves face to face. You look different, he said. The same observation Nathan had made, but weighted with accusation instead of admiration. I am different. This isn't you, Sune. This performance, this costume. I know who you really are. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd convinced himself he understood everything while understanding nothing. You never knew who I was, Benji. You knew who you needed me to be. There's a universe of difference between those things. She walked past him without waiting for a response, her heels clicking against marble, surrounded by people who treated her like she mattered because she'd decided she did. Chapter 5. The Alliance Isadora. Loros lived in a Fifth Avenue apartment that had been in the family for 3 generations. The building was one of those pre-war structures where wealth whispered instead of shouted, where doormen knew your name and your secrets with equal discretion. Sune had been summoned here via text message. 3 words that carried the weight of command. Lunch, tomorrow, non-negotiable. She arrived precisely on time, dressed in a suit that Harper had selected for its message. Respectful but not submissive, elegant but not trying too hard. The doorman recognized her immediately, which meant Isadora had warned the staff, which meant this meeting mattered. The elevator operator, a man who must have been with the building since before Sune was born, offered her a slight smile as they ascended. Mrs. Floros is expecting you. She's been looking forward to your visit. The phrasing was careful, revealing nothing while suggesting everything. Looking forward implied anticipation, perhaps even pleasure. Soon filed the observation away, another data point in understanding the woman who controlled so much of her future. The apartment was everything Soon expected. Priceless art on every wall, furniture that had survived wars, windows overlooking Central Park like the city existed for the family's viewing pleasure. But what surprised her was the warmth. She'd expected the sterile perfection of a museum, but instead found evidence of actual living. Books stacked on side tables, reading glasses abandoned on an ottoman, a half-finished crossword puzzle resting near a window. Isadora waited in the dining room, seated at a table set for 2 with china that was probably older than the building itself. She wore a simple dress in deep blue, elegant without trying. Her grey hair swept back in a style that emphasized bone structure that had probably stopped men in their tracks 50 years ago. You're punctual, Isadora observed. Benji is always late. He learned from his father that making people wait is a power move. I taught him nothing, apparently. Soon sat without being invited, a small rebellion that Isadora noted with the flicker of a smile. Thank you for the invitation. Don't pretend you had a choice. When I summon someone, they come. Isadora poured tea from a silver service that had survived the Greek Civil War. But you knew that already. You've been studying this family for 3 years, learning our weaknesses. Is that what you think I've been doing? It's what I would have done in your position. It's what I should have done 50 years ago when I married into this family and realized, too late, what I'd signed up for. Isadora's hands were steady as she poured, but Sune noticed the thinness of her wrists, the way her wedding ring hung loose. I was 19 when I married Alexandros. 19 and stupid enough to believe that money and status meant security. Staff brought lunch, delicate portions of food Sune couldn't name, but that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. They ate in silence for several minutes while Sune waited for Isadora to reveal why this meeting was really happening. The older woman seemed to be gathering herself, preparing for something difficult, My husband beat me, Isadora said abruptly, setting down her fork with careful precision. For 30 years. Did you know that? Soon's breath caught. No, nobody knew. I was excellent at hiding it. Makeup, long sleeves, lies to doctors. The wealthy are very good at concealing violence behind closed doors. Isadora's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. Alexandros was charming in public, brutal in private. He viewed women as property to be controlled. I stayed because leaving would have meant poverty and shame, because divorce wasn't something people in our circle did. I'm sorry, Suna said quietly. The word's inadequate but genuine. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Isadora fixed her with a stare that could cut glass. I watched my husband destroy your father's company because he couldn't stand the competition from someone he viewed as inferior. I watched him force Benji to marry you as some kind of deathbed gesture toward redemption. And I watched you spend 3 years trying to become small enough to fit into a life that was designed to erase you. I'm done being small. Obviously. Isadora gestured toward Suna with her teacup. The board meeting last week was masterful. You humiliated my son in exactly the way he deserved. His father would have been furious, which is the highest compliment I can give. Sun studied the older woman across the table, trying to understand where this conversation was heading. The vulnerability Isadora was showing felt both genuine and strategic, as though she'd calculated exactly how much truth to reveal. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to help you finish what you started. Isadora set down her cup and pulled out a folder from beneath her napkin. I'm transferring 12% of my shares in Floros Industries to you through a trust that will vest over the next 6 months. Combined with what you already own, that will make you the second largest stakeholder in the company, ahead of Benji. The words hung in the air like smoke. Soon's mind raced through implications. With 29%, she would have enough voting power to challenge any decision Benji made. To force votes she wanted, to fundamentally reshape the company's direction. Why? Sune asked. Why would you give your own son's inheritance to his wife? Because you're not his wife anymore, not in any way that matters. You're the woman who's going to save this company from his incompetence and this family from its worst instincts. Isadora slid the folder across the table. My husband was a monster. My son is becoming one. I spent 50 years being too weak to stop the cycle. You're strong enough to break it. Soon opened the folder and read through legal documents that represented millions in transferred wealth, in voting power, in the ability to reshape an empire. The terms were exactly what Isadora had described, a trust that would vest incrementally, making Sune progressively more powerful while keeping Benji unaware until it was too late to stop it. There's one condition, Isadora continued. You must stay married to Benji for the next 6 months while the trust vests. If you divorce him before then, the shares revert to me and eventually to him. I want him to experience what it's like to be trapped in a relationship with someone who has all the power. I want him to understand what he put you through. That's cruel. Yes, it is. Do we have an agreement? Soon thought about walking away, about taking her 17% and building something independent of the Floros family entirely. But Dimitri's voice echoed in her head, her father's lessons about finishing what you start, her grandmother's stories about women who got close to power and then lost their nerve. We have an agreement. Isadora smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting decades for the right weapon to finally present itself. Good. Now let me tell you about every skeleton in this family's closet. You're going to need ammunition for what comes next. They talked for hours. Isadora revealed secrets that even Victor's research hadn't uncovered. Offshore accounts that violated tax laws, deals made with questionable partners, affairs that could ruin reputations, vulnerabilities that Benji didn't know existed. She spoke with the precision of someone who'd been cataloging evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Alexandros had a mistress in Athens for 15 years, Isadora said. her voice flat with the exhaustion of old pain. He kept her in an apartment 3 blocks from where his mother lived. Everyone knew except me, or maybe I knew and pretended not to, because acknowledging it would have meant acknowledging everything else. Did you ever confront him? Once. He broke 3 of my ribs and told me that what he did outside our home was none of my concern, that my job was to look appropriate at events and keep my mouth shut. Isadora refilled her tea with hands that had steadied through the telling. I never asked again. By the time Suna left the apartment, she carried enough information to destroy the Flores family 3 times over. But more than that, she carried the weight of Isadora's unspoken plea, break what I couldn't break, save what I couldn't save, be strong where I was weak. She walked through Central Park afterward, needing air and space to process what had just happened. The afternoon sun filtered through autumn leaves, painting everything gold and amber. Families pushed strollers. Couples held hands. People lived lives where the worst thing that happened to them was a delayed train or a bad coffee order. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages. Victor wanting updates, Rebecca requesting meetings, Nathan checking in about acquisition negotiations. She ignored them all and sat on a bench near the lake, watching ducks paddle through water that reflected the sky. A text came through from Benji. "Where are you? We need to talk." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "At your mother's. She says hello." The 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating he was typing a response, but they disappeared without anything being sent. Zune imagined him at his desk trying to figure out what his mother might have told her, what alliances were forming without his knowledge, what control he'd already lost. Another message appeared. "What did she tell you?" Zune smiled and turned off her phone. Let him wonder, let him spiral. Let him experience a fraction of the uncertainty he'd inflicted on her for years. That evening, she returned to the Connecticut house for the first time since the gala. The staff greeted her with careful neutrality, their professionalism unable to completely mask their awareness that something fundamental had shifted in the household power structure. The housekeeper, a woman who'd been with the family for decades, actually smiled at her. A real smile, not the polite mask service workers wore around the wealthy. "It's good to see you, Mrs. Flores," the woman said, and the warmth in her voice suggested she meant it. Benji found her in the dining room, where she'd instructed the chef to prepare an elaborate meal using all of his favorite dishes from childhood. The table was set with their wedding china, candles lit, wine already poured. It looked like a romantic dinner, like an attempt at reconciliation. He entered the room confused, suspicious, hopeful in ways he probably didn't want to admit. "What is this?" "Dinner," Suna said simply, rising from her seat. "I thought we should eat together, talk, like married people do." He approached the table slowly, as though expecting a trap. "You've been avoiding me for weeks. I've been busy, building a life that doesn't revolve around you." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, let's have a civilized conversation." They sat. The chef brought course after course, foods Benji hadn't eaten since his father was alive, recipes from his childhood that carried memories of times before he learned to weaponize his privilege. Zune watched him eat, saw the confusion deepening as he tried to understand what game she was playing. "My mother likes you," he said finally between courses. "She's never liked anyone I've dated or married." "What did you talk about?" "Your father, his violence, the way patterns repeat through generations unless someone chooses to break them." Benji's fork clattered against his plate. "She told you about that?" "She told me everything. About how he beat her for 30 years. About how she raised you in that environment. About how she regrets not being strong enough to leave, to protect you from learning to treat people the way he treated her." "I'm not like him." "Aren't you?" Suna took a sip of wine, holding his gaze over the rim of the glass. "You've never hit me, that's true. But there are many ways to destroy a person. Violence isn't always physical. Benji stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't. You can leave. You can go back to your club or your mistress or wherever you go when you're avoiding reality. But eventually, you're going to have to face what you've become." He stared at her, and for the first time since the gala, she saw something other than arrogance or rage in his expression. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding, or at least the first crack in the armor he'd built around himself. "What do you want from me, Suna?" She stood, walked around the table until she was close enough to smell his cologne, close enough to see the confusion in his eyes. Then she handed him the folder Rebecca had prepared weeks ago. 47 pages of divorce papers that would leave him with almost nothing. He started to open it, but before he could read the first page, Soon took the papers from his hands and tore them in half. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the silent room, final and deliberate. "I'm not divorcing you," she said quietly. "Not yet. I want you to live with what you've done. I want you to wake up every morning knowing that your wife owns more of your company than you do, that your mother trusts her more than she trusts you, that you had something priceless and threw it away because you were too arrogant to see its value. For how long? As long as it takes for you to understand what you destroyed." She walked past him toward the door, then paused. "Your father forced this marriage as penance for destroying mine. But I'm going to use it for something he never imagined, teaching his son that some women can't be broken. Some women break back." She left him standing in the dining room, surrounded by his favorite foods and the torn remnants of her mercy. And the expression on his face was the look of a man who'd finally realized he was outmatched. Through the window, she could see the grounds of the estate stretching into darkness, the same grounds where she'd once believed she could build a life worth living. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that survival sometimes meant becoming harder than the forces trying to break you. And that victory tasted like cold wine and torn paper, and the satisfaction of watching someone finally understand the weight of their own cruelty. Chapter 6. The Counterattack. Benji's campaign to reclaim his wife began with flowers. Dozens of roses arrived at the hotel suite where Suni had been staying, arrangements so elaborate they couldn't fit through the door. She had them delivered to the hospital where her father had died, each bouquet accompanied by a card reading, "In memory of men who deserved better." The gesture wasn't kind. It was strategic. She wanted Benji to know that his money couldn't buy forgiveness, that his grand gestures were being redirected to honor the man his family had destroyed. The flowers kept coming. Every morning, new arrangements. Roses, orchids, peonies in colors that must have cost a fortune. Every morning, Suna had them sent to the hospital, to nursing homes, to hospice centers. The nurses started calling to thank her, telling stories about patients whose days were brightened by unexpected beauty. "Your husband must love you very much," one nurse said during a call. "My husband loves control," Suna corrected. "These flowers are an apology for taking it away from him." Next came jewelry, Cartier, Tiffany, pieces that would make most women gasp. Soon returned each item unopened with notes that were masterclasses in brevity. "Not interested. Try harder." Still no. The restaurants came after the jewelry failed. Reservations at impossible-to-book establishments where people waited months for tables. Benji's assistant would call to confirm that Mrs. Floros knew about the 8 o'clock reservation at Per Se. The private room at Le Bernardin, the chef's table at 11 Madison Park. Soon never showed up. She was always busy with meetings that mattered more than dinner theater. But while Benji wasted his energy on romantic gestures, Thessaly Varnava was making moves that actually mattered. The Greek heiress had connections Suna hadn't fully accounted for, and she'd apparently decided that if she couldn't have Benji, she'd at least make sure his wife didn't win completely. The first indication came from Victor, calling at midnight with urgency in his voice. "We have a problem." Thessaly is buying up the same shares we've been targeting. She's outbidding us by 20% on every acquisition. Soon sat up in bed, her mind already calculating implications. How much has she acquired? 4% so far, but she's moving fast, and she has deeper pockets than we anticipated. If she gets to 10% before your mother-in-law's trust vests, she could block any major decisions we try to make. Can we stop her? Not legally. She has every right to buy shares on the open market. We could try to outbid her, but that would drain your resources and alert Benji to what's happening. Soon paced her hotel room, thinking through options. This was the first real challenge to her plan, the first time someone had outmaneuvered her instead of the other way around. The realization was both infuriating and clarifying. What's her endgame? Suna asked. She can't get enough shares to control the company. She doesn't need control. She just needs enough to be a nuisance. To force you to negotiate with her. To make you pay for humiliating her at the museum gala. 2 days later, Suna received an invitation to lunch from Thessaly. The location was telling. A private club where women weren't normally admitted except as guests. Thessaly was demonstrating her access to spaces that still excluded people like Sun. She considered refusing, but curiosity won out. She arrived dressed in one of Harper's power suits, prepared for confrontation. Thessaly was already seated when Suna arrived, drinking wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She gestured to the chair across from her with the languid confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "I wondered if you'd come," Thessaly said. "Pride can be such an inconvenient emotion." "I'm here because I'm curious what you think you've accomplished," Sun replied, sitting without waiting for permission. "Buying 4% of Floros Industries makes you a minor shareholder, not a power player. 4% today, 7% by end of week, 10% by the end of the month." Thessaly smiled like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. "I have friends, Suna. Old money friends who've been watching your little revolution with concern. They don't like the precedent you're setting. A wife taking over her husband's company? It makes their own wives get ideas. So this is about keeping women in their place. This is about maintaining order." Thessaly leaned forward, and for the first time, Suna saw something other than aristocratic disdain in her expression. Something that looked almost like kinship. "You think you're the only one who's been dismissed by men like Benji? I've spent 15 years being told I'm decorative. That my family's fortune is interesting, but I'm not. That I should be grateful for male attention because what else do women like me have to offer?" The confession caught Suna off guard. She'd expected cruelty, not vulnerability. "Then why fight me?" Suna asked. "Why not help me prove that women like us are more than decoration?" "Boo. Because you're proving it by destroying a man publicly. That doesn't change the system, it just makes one example. And when the dust settles, those old money friends of mine will use your victory as evidence that women are vindictive, emotional, unfit for leadership. They'll tighten their grip, not loosen it." Thessaly's voice carried a weariness that suggested she'd thought about this extensively. "I'm not fighting you out of loyalty to Benji. I'm fighting you because your revenge makes things harder for the rest of us." "So what do you want?" "Dadadoo-un. I'm prepared to make you an offer. Sell me your shares at market value, walk away from Floros Industries, and I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. You'll be rich and free. Isn't that what you wanted?" Suna studied the woman across from her, seeing clearly for the first time what she was up against. Not just Benji's incompetence, but an entire system designed to keep certain people in power and others in submission. "No," Sun said simply. "No, I'm offering you millions. I don't want your money. I want what's mine, and I'm going to take it regardless of how many shares you buy." Thessaly's expression hardened. "Then you'll lose. Even if you get your mother-in-law's shares, I'll have enough to block your initiatives. Every decision will be a battle. Every vote will be contested. I'll make running that company so exhausting you'll beg to sell out. Then I'll be exhausted. But I won't be defeated." Soon stood to leave, but Thessaly's voice stopped her. You're making a mistake. Not with me, with Nathan Wellington. What about Nathan? He's in love with you. Everyone can see it. And you're using that affection to secure his business partnership while giving him nothing in return. When you break his heart, and you will because you're too cold now to love anyone, he'll withdraw his support. You'll lose the maritime acquisition, your credibility with clients, everything you've built on his goodwill. The words landed like arrows, finding weaknesses Suna had been trying to ignore. She thought about Nathan's patient kindness, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the hope he carried that maybe someday she'd let him in. My relationship with Nathan is none of your concern. It will be when it falls apart and takes your empire with it. Suna left the club, but Thessaly's warning echoed in her head. She'd been so focused on destroying Benji that she hadn't considered the collateral damage. Nathan deserved better than to be a pawn in her revenge. But she didn't know how to be vulnerable with him, didn't know if she was capable of giving him what he needed. That night, she convened an emergency meeting with her team. Victor, Rebecca, Nathan, and Harper all gathered in her hotel suite, spreading financial documents across every available surface. We need to change strategy, Suna said. Thessaly is buying shares to block us. We can't outbid her directly, but we can make her position untenable. How? Rebecca asked. By making Floros Industries so successful under our leadership that her shares become valuable enough that her own investors pressure her to sell. She's not buying these shares with her own money. She's raised capital from those old money friends she mentioned. If we can make the company's value skyrocket, they'll want to cash out at the peak. That's a long game, Victor warned. It could take months. Then we play the long game. But as they worked through the night, building a counter-strategy, Soon made a critical error. She was tired, frustrated by Thessaly's interference, and rattled by the warning about Nathan. When Rebecca suggested they leak information about the upcoming Wellington maritime acquisition to financial analysts, Soon agreed without thinking through the implications. We need to create buzz, Rebecca explained. Get people excited about Floros' future so Thessaly's investors start seeing dollar signs. Do it, Suna said. Whatever it takes to neutralize her. The leak went out that night. By morning, every financial publication was running stories about Floros Industries' rumored acquisition of Wellington Maritime, about their move towards sustainable shipping, about the brilliant strategic vision of the new leadership team. The stock price jumped 15%. Thessaly's investors started making noise about selling. Soon thought she'd won. She was wrong. 2 days later, Nathan showed up at her office with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Cold fury barely contained beneath professional courtesy. You leaked the acquisition, he said without preamble, before it was finalized, before we'd notified our existing clients, before my board had a chance to prepare. Soon felt ice forming in her stomach. I thought it would help build momentum. It's caused chaos. 3 of my major clients are threatening to leave because they found out from the news that we're being acquired. My board is furious because they look incompetent, like they couldn't even control their own company's messaging. And my competitors are circling, trying to poach our staff while we're distracted by media attention. I'm sorry. I didn't think that's exactly the problem. You didn't think? You were so focused on beating Thessaly that you treated my company like a chess piece instead of a living organization with people who depend on it. Nathan's voice was quiet, controlled, devastating. I've spent 15 years building Wellington Maritime. 15 years earning trust, creating relationships, proving myself in markets that didn't want to take me seriously. And you almost destroyed all of that for a tactical advantage in your revenge plot. I'll fix it. I'll issue a statement, talk to your clients personally. I've already fixed it. Spent the past 48 hours in damage control, calling every major client, reassuring my board, managing the media chaos you created." He sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "The acquisition is still happening. But I need you to understand something. My company isn't a tool for you to use. The people who work for me aren't collateral damage in your war with your husband. If we're going to be partners, you need to start thinking about consequences beyond your immediate victory." Soon felt something cracking inside her, the protection she'd built, developing its first real fracture. "You're right." "I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo damage." Nathan stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Thessaly was right about one thing. You've become so focused on being invincible that you've forgotten how to be human. And that's going to cost you more than any shares or board votes ever could." He left, and soon sat alone in her office, looking out over Manhattan, tasting failure for the first time since she'd started this campaign. She'd won tactical victories, the board meeting, the social transformation, but she'd almost lost something that mattered more, an ally who'd never treated her as less than she was, whose respect she'd taken for granted. She pulled out her phone and called Rebecca. "The leak was my mistake," Soon said. "Issue a statement taking full responsibility. Make it clear that Nathan and Wellington Maritime had nothing to do with it, that it was my error in judgment. That will make you look incompetent." I was incompetent. I let my need to win override good judgment. Issue the statement. When Rebecca hung up, Soon stayed at her desk watching the sun set over Manhattan, understanding for the first time that winning wasn't just about destroying your enemies. It was about not destroying your friends in the process. And that balance, she was learning, was far harder to maintain than she'd ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Execution. The quarterly shareholders' meeting was usually a formality attended by analysts and minor investors who owned enough shares to warrant invitation, but not enough to matter. Soon had studied the attendance records going back 5 years. Average turnout was around 30 people. Meetings rarely lasted more than an hour. Votes were always unanimous because Benji controlled the narrative. This year would be different. She'd spent 2 weeks personally contacting every shareholder, every analyst who covered the company, every financial journalist who'd ever written about Floros Industries. The invitations she sent were masterpieces of strategic ambiguity. Quarterly meeting with special presentations regarding company restructuring and leadership evaluation. The conference room could hold 300 people. Suni booked it anyway. Let them think she was overestimating her importance. Let them underestimate her until the moment she proved them wrong. She arrived 3 hours early to oversee every detail. The presentation screen positioned for maximum visibility. Microphones tested and retested. Packets of documentation prepared for every seat, each one containing evidence that would be impossible to ignore. Rebecca helped her arrange the materials with the precision of someone setting up a legal execution. "You're sure about this?" Rebecca asked, reviewing the presentation one final time. "Once you do this, there's no taking it back. I've never been more sure of anything." Victor arrived next, carrying additional files in case anyone challenged their data. He set up at a side table, ready to provide backup documentation for every claim Suna would make. Nathan came after, dressed in a suit that announced his arrival in these circles, whether they welcomed him or not. By the time doors opened at 8, the room was ready, and so was Soon. Benji hadn't planned to attend. He never attended quarterly meetings, considered them beneath his time. But his assistant forwarded him the agenda item about restructuring, and suddenly he was very interested in what his wife might present. He walked into the conference room, expecting to find 30 people, and instead discovered 300 shareholders filling every seat. Analysts from Bloomberg and Reuters and the Wall Street Journal setting up in designated press areas. Cameras from CNBC and Bloomberg Television running final equipment checks. The air hummed with anticipation, with the sense that something significant was about to happen. The room fell silent when he entered. Every eye tracked his movement as he made his way to the front where a seat had been reserved for him. Not the power position, just a seat near the front like any other board member. Someone had placed a name card there, B. Floros, board member, not CEO, not president, just board member. Soon stood at the podium in a red suit that made her look like revolution personified. Her hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized her bone structure, her makeup minimal but strategic. She looked like someone who'd been born to command rooms like this. Behind her, the presentation screen glowed with the title slide, and Benji felt his stomach drop when he read it. "Thank you all for attending," she began, her voice carrying across the space with perfect clarity. "I know this is an unusual turnout for a quarterly meeting, but the matters we're discussing today warrant your full attention." She pulled up the first slide, "The future of Floros Industries. A reckoning." Benji's face went pale. He looked around the room searching for allies, but found only curious faces waiting to see what would happen next. What followed was the most meticulously documented destruction of a CEO's reputation that anyone in attendance had ever witnessed. Soon presented everything. The affairs with employees, complete with dates and settlement amounts. The NDAs that had cost the company millions. The hostile work environment that had driven away top talent, including 3 vice presidents who'd taken proprietary information to competitors. She showed emails where Benji mocked board members, insulted long-time clients, made decisions based on ego rather than analysis. Each email appeared on screen with sender, recipient, date, and damning content. The audience watched in silence as Benji's leadership was dissected with surgical precision. "This email," Soon said, highlighting one particularly offensive message, was sent to a colleague after a board member questioned a development project in Southeast Asia. Mr. Floros wrote, and I quote, "If Castellanos thinks he's qualified to question my decisions, he should remember who signs his checks. Maybe it's time we reminded him that board seats aren't lifetime appointments." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Castellanos, sitting 3 rows back, looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. She presented data proving that under his leadership, Floros Industries had underperformed the market significantly while competitors doubled their valuations. The graphs were color-coded, impossible to misinterpret, showing steady decline across every meaningful metric. "Client satisfaction has dropped 40 points, Suna continued, pulling up graphs that made the decline visual and undeniable. "Employee retention is at a 15-year low. Our reputation in the industry has suffered to the point that we're no longer invited to participate in key industry coalitions. 3 major shipping associations removed us from leadership positions last year alone." She revealed a development project in Southeast Asia that Benji had approved despite clear environmental violations, exposing the company to potential litigation that could cost billions. The documentation was thorough. Environmental impact assessments he'd ignored, warnings from legal counsel he'd dismissed, a testimony from local officials describing the damage. "But the most significant issue," Suna said, her voice dropping slightly so everyone leaned forward to hear, "is that 70% of our major clients have indicated they will not renew their contracts unless leadership changes are made." The room erupted in whispers. This was news that moved markets, that affected share prices, that changed everything. She pulled up letters from CEOs of major companies, each one expressing concerns about Floros Industries' direction, about Benji's judgment, about their inability to continue partnerships under current management. The letters were real, obtained through the relationships Suna had been building for months, while Benji assumed she was just playing at business. "These aren't idle threats," Suna continued. "These are contracts worth hundreds of millions in annual revenue, contracts that represent the foundation of this company's profitability. And they're all at risk because of leadership that prioritizes ego over excellence." I've spent the past 2 months meeting personally with every major client this company has, Suna continued. I've listened to their concerns. I've addressed their questions. And I've secured written commitments from them to maintain and even increase their contracts if specific changes are made. She clicked to the next slide. Proposed leadership restructuring. The room held its collective breath. Even the press stopped taking notes, waiting to hear what came next. I propose that Benji Floros be removed as CEO and replaced with a leadership team consisting of Nathan Wellington as Chief Operating Officer, myself as Chief Strategy Officer, and Victor Petrov as Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Floros would retain his board seat and the title of Chairman, a position that recognizes his family's legacy while acknowledging that day-to-day operations require different skills. The proposal was devastating in its precision. It stripped Benji of power while leaving him visible enough that his humiliation would be public and ongoing. He would have to attend board meetings where his former wife gave him instructions, would have to smile for cameras at events where she was the face of the company, would exist as a living reminder of his own failure. Board members shifted in their seats. Shareholders whispered to each other. The press took notes frantically. Benji found his voice. This is insane. You can't just walk in here and propose dismantling the leadership structure that my father built. Your father built a company on intimidation and market manipulation, Suna replied calmly. I'm proposing we rebuild it on competence and ethics. The choice is yours. I now open the floor for discussion, she said, her tone suggesting she welcomed challenges. The discussion lasted 2 hours. Shareholders asked questions about Suna's qualifications, about Nathan's experience, about whether this was a personal vendetta disguised as business strategy. She answered every question with facts and figures, with testimonials from clients, with projections showing how the company could recover under new leadership. One shareholder, a man who'd invested in Floros Industries for decades, stood to speak. Mrs. Floros, your presentation is compelling, but how do we know this isn't just revenge? That you won't run this company into the ground out of spite? Because spite doesn't pay dividends, Suna replied. Because I own enough shares that destroying this company would hurt me as much as anyone else. And because, unlike the current leadership, I actually care about the thousands of people who work here and depend on us for their livelihoods. Another shareholder asked about the timeline. How quickly could this transition happen? Immediately. The new leadership team is prepared to begin tomorrow. We have transition plans ready, client communications drafted, employee announcements prepared. We've been planning this for months. Benji tried to speak multiple times, but his objections sounded hollow against Suna's mountain of evidence. He claimed the affairs were private matters that didn't affect his leadership. She showed how settlement costs had directly impacted quarterly earnings. He insisted the client complaints were exaggerated. She pulled up emails from CEOs threatening to leave unless changes were made. This is a coup, Benji finally shouted, standing up so violently his chair tipped backward. She's my wife. This is a domestic dispute, not a business decision. I'm not your wife in any way that matters, Suna said coldly. I'm a major shareholder protecting my investment. If you want to discuss our marriage, we can do that in private. But this meeting is about saving a company you've been destroying through incompetence and arrogance. The moderator called for order. When the room settled, Benji remained standing, his face red with rage and humiliation. I built this company into what it is today. My father trusted me with his legacy, and I'm trying to salvage something from the wreckage of that trust, Isadora said from her position at the side of the room. Every head turned toward her. She rarely spoke at these meetings, preferring to observe. I vote in favor of my daughter-in-law's proposal. It's time for new leadership. The words landed like a death sentence. If Benji's own mother was voting against him, what hope did he have? When the vote was called, the result wasn't even close. 68% of shareholders approved the restructuring. Only Benji and 3 loyalists voted against, their opposition noted for the record, but ultimately meaningless. "Motion passes," Isadora announced. "Effective immediately, leadership restructuring will begin. This meeting is adjourned." The press swarmed soon as she left the podium. Questions came from every direction about her plans, her relationship with Benji, whether this was revenge or business strategy. She answered selectively, giving just enough to feed the story without revealing everything she knew. "This has nothing to do with my marriage," she told a reporter from the Times. "This has everything to do with protecting a company that employs thousands of people and serves clients who deserve leadership that prioritizes their needs over personal ego." The quotes would run in tomorrow's papers, carefully crafted to position her as a savior rather than a scorned wife. Benji left the conference room in a daze. Someone from HR was waiting to escort him to his new office, a smaller space on a lower floor with a view of another building instead of Central Park. His assistant had been reassigned. His files had been moved. His nameplate was already changed. When he reached what had been his office, he found Soon inside, supervising the arrangement of her own furniture. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "This is mine now," she said simply. "Everything you had is mine. Your office, your position, your authority. You're welcome to your new space down the hall. You've destroyed me. No, I've removed you from a position you were unqualified for. You destroyed yourself through incompetence and arrogance. I just made it official." Benji stared at her, this woman who'd been invisible in beige and was now commanding in red, who'd been silent at his side and was now speaking with authority he'd never possessed. "How long?" he asked. "How long are you going to make me suffer? Until you understand what you did, until you comprehend the full weight of treating another human being as worthless, until you've experienced a fraction of the humiliation you put me through." She turned back to the window, dismissing him. "Now please leave. I have work to do." He left, and Suna stood at the window that used to be his, looking out over Manhattan, feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. Below, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the small revolutions happening in boardrooms and hearts, indifferent to everything except its own relentless momentum forward. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Benji stopped shaving. It was the first sign that something fundamental had broken. His face, always perfectly groomed, grew rough with stubble that became a beard that became something unkempt and wild. His hair went uncombed. His suits became wrinkled. The man who'd built his identity on perfect presentation was coming apart at the seams. He started showing up at Soon's office at strange hours. Midnight, 3 in the morning, dawn. The security guards would call her when he was on his way up, giving her time to prepare or leave through the private exit Rebecca had arranged specifically for this purpose. One night, she decided to face him. Let him see her still working at 11 while he stumbled in drunk and desperate. He found her at her desk, surrounded by reports about shipping routes and sustainability initiatives, looking more competent than he'd ever been. "We used to talk," he said, leaning against the doorframe, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Remember when we were first together? We'd stay up all night discussing everything. Those conversations were with someone who doesn't exist anymore." Suna didn't look up from her work. "That woman died the night you told her she wasn't worth your touch. I didn't mean it." "Yes, you did. And even if you didn't, you said it anyway, which is somehow worse. It means you knew exactly which words would destroy me, and you chose them deliberately." He moved into the room, stumbling slightly, and Suna tensed. Not from fear, but from disgust at what he'd become. The security guard appeared in the doorway, having followed Benji up, ready to intervene. "Don't touch me," Soon said clearly, her eyes still on her papers. "Don't come closer. Don't speak. Just leave." "Sooner, please, Mr. Floros." The security guard's voice was firm. "You need to leave. Mrs. Floros has asked you to go." Benji looked at the guard, someone who'd worked for his family for years, and seemed to realize that even the staff now saw Suna as the authority. His face crumpled, and for a moment Suna thought he might cry. Instead, he turned and left without argument, his footsteps unsteady in the hallway. The drinking got worse. Benji showed up drunk to a board meeting where Suna was presenting quarterly projections. He tried to interrupt her presentation with slurred objections that made no sense. Isadora, sitting at the head of the table, made a subtle gesture, and 2 board members physically removed him from the room. The press got photographs of him stumbling out of the building. The next day's headlines were brutal. Fallen Empire, former CEO removed from own board meeting. His friends stopped calling entirely. Stellan Voss, who'd been his closest friend since childhood, sent him a text that was forwarded to Soon through channels she'd established. "You did this to yourself. Sune is the better investment. Figure out your life." Others followed. Within a week, Benji had lost his entire social circle to the woman he'd once dismissed as worthless. But the lowest point came at his mother's annual charity gala, the same event where Soon's destruction had begun months earlier. Benji showed up drunk, uninvited, causing a scene that would be reported in society pages for weeks. He found Soon talking with Nathan and a group of donors, her laugh carrying across the ballroom in ways that reminded everyone she'd found joy without him. Benji pushed through the crowd, his coordination failing him, his desperation visible to everyone watching. "You're destroying me," he shouted, loud enough that the string quartet faltered. "You've taken everything. Isn't that enough?" Suna turned to face him, her expression calm, unbothered by his public breakdown. "I haven't taken anything. I've claimed what was always mine. The difference is you're finally being held accountable." "I loved you," he said, and the words came out garbled, pathetic. "I still love you. You love control. You love possession. You've never loved me, because you've never seen me as human enough to love." Security moved in then, the same team who'd removed him from the board meeting. They escorted him out with professional efficiency, while 300 guests watched in silence. When the doors closed behind him, the quartet resumed playing, and conversations picked up as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Benji's public humiliation was complete. The press had photographs. Social media had videos. The man who'd once commanded rooms through charisma alone was now a cautionary tale about what happened when you mistook cruelty for strength. The next morning, Rebecca called Suna with a recommendation. "He's spiraling dangerously. People are starting to pity him. Let them pity him. Pity can turn to sympathy. Sympathy can turn into a narrative where you become the villain who destroyed a man who made one mistake." Soon understood the warning. Public opinion was fickle. Right now, she was the triumphant wife who'd risen from humiliation. But if Benji kept deteriorating publicly, the story could shift to her being cruel and vindictive. "What do you suggest?" "Recommend therapy, publicly. It makes you look compassionate while putting the responsibility for his recovery on him." Soon considered the strategy. It was cold, calculated, exactly the kind of move Benji would have made if their positions were reversed, which was exactly why it was perfect. She wrote a letter to Benji, left it at his new office with her signature across the seal so he'd know she'd handled it personally. "Your feelings are no longer my concern, but if you're genuinely interested in becoming a better person rather than reclaiming a possession, Dr. Miriam Foster specializes in helping men understand why they destroy the things they claim to love. Her office is on Park Avenue. Do the work or don't, but stop performing your redemption for my benefit." Benji showed up at Dr. Foster's office 3 days later. The therapy sessions began, but progress was slow and painful. He spent the first month just complaining about Suna, about how unfair his situation was, about how he didn't deserve this level of destruction. Dr. Foster listened patiently, then told him something he didn't want to hear. "You're not here to win your wife back. You're here to understand why you felt entitled to destroy her in the first place." Until you can separate those two things, you're wasting both our time. The work continued. Sessions 3 times a week, where Benji was forced to examine behaviors he'd never questioned. But he remained defensive, resistant, still convinced that if he just said the right things, did the right things, Soon would eventually forgive him. He called her one evening from a payphone because Dr. Foster had made him leave his cell phone at home. "I'm doing what you asked," he said without preamble. "I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand." "Good, that's good for you. Will you forgive me?" "No, but I might eventually stop hating you, which is the best you're going to get. How long do I have to do this before you'll talk to me? Really talk to me?" "Deal, as long as it takes for you to understand that I don't owe you anything. That your growth is something you do for yourself, not as a strategy to win me back." She hung up before he could respond, and Benji stood in the phone booth, realizing that even doing what she'd asked didn't guarantee her return. Chapter 9. The Revelation. 4 months after the shareholders' meeting, Isadora Flores invited Soon and Benji to dinner at her Fifth Avenue apartment. The invitation came via text, the kind that wasn't really a request. "Family dinner. Both of you. Tonight." Soon arrived exactly on time, dressed in a way that was respectful but not submissive. She'd learned to read Isadora's moods, to understand when the older woman was testing versus when she was serious. This felt serious. The doorman greeted her with unusual solemnity. "Mrs. Flores is waiting for you upstairs. She asked me to tell you that Mr. Benji has already arrived." The elevator ride felt longer than usual, giving Soon time to prepare herself for whatever confrontation or revelation awaited. The last time she'd been summoned here, Isadora had offered her shares and revealed decades of abuse. What could possibly be left to say? Benji arrived early, which was new. The man who'd always been fashionably late had apparently learned punctuality, along with everything else he was working on in therapy. He looked different, cleaner, more present. The wild desperation that had characterized his spiral was gone, replaced by something quieter. But he still carried a self-pity in his eyes that told Suna his transformation was incomplete. He stood when she entered, an automatic gesture of politeness that seemed newly learned rather than instinctive. Soon, Benji, they regarded each other across Isadora's living room like former soldiers from opposing armies, bound by shared trauma, but separated by unbridgeable distance. They sat at Isadora's dining table, the same one where she'd offered Suna her shares months ago. The older woman looked frailer than she had then, her hands trembling slightly as she poured wine. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, like paper held up to light. Soon had seen that look before, on her father in his final weeks. "You're dying," Soon said, because she'd learned to recognize mortality in the way people moved when they were running out of time. Isadora smiled. "Yes, the cancer came back. I refused treatment this time. I have 4 months, maybe less." Benji's face went white. "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." Isadora's voice was gentle in a way it rarely was. "I wanted you both here because I have things to say, and I'm done pretending I have time for subtlety." She told them everything, about Alexandros's violence, about the 30 years of systematic abuse, about watching her husband destroy Suna's father because he couldn't tolerate competition, about forcing the marriage between Benji and Soon as some twisted deathbed gesture toward redemption. "Your father was a monster," Isadora told Benji, her hands wrapped around her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "He beat me throughout our marriage, broke my bones, my spirit, everything that made me who I was before him. I stayed because I was too weak to leave, too afraid of what divorce would mean." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Soon had heard this confession before, but Benji was hearing it for the first time, and his face cycled through expressions: disbelief, horror, rage, grief. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Mother, I swear I didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. That was the point. But you learned anyway, absorbed his patterns through observation. You learned that women are property to be controlled, that emotions are weakness, that real men dominate everyone around them. Isadora's voice carried disappointment that cut deeper than anger. Your father used fists. You used words and contempt. The bruises are different, but the damage is the same. I'm not him. I never hit Sun. No, you're not. You never hit her. Isadora set down her glass and reached across the table to take her son's hand, a gesture of tenderness Suna had never witnessed between them. But you destroyed her in slower, more insidious ways. You made her feel worthless, invisible, like her only value was in how well she disappeared. Benji pulled his hand away, stood up, began pacing the room like a caged animal. I'm trying to change. I'm in therapy. I'm doing the work. I know you are, Isadora said quietly, and I'm proud of you for that. But change doesn't erase what you did. It just makes the future less tragic. She turned to Suna then, her eyes carrying the weight of decades of regret and something else. Relief, maybe, or resignation. I'm leaving my remaining shares to you, all of them. When I die, you'll control the majority of Floros Industries. My son will work for you, answer to you, exist at your mercy. Mother, Benji started, but Isadora cut him off with a raised hand. This is not punishment, though I know it feels like it. This is the only way I know to break the cycle. Your father controlled me through money and violence. You controlled Suna through dismissal and cruelty. Now she'll control you through the very power structures your father built. Maybe then you'll understand what it's like to be powerless. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Benji stared at his mother as though seeing her for the first time. This woman who'd survived decades of violence and was using her final months to reshape the family legacy. You're choosing her over me, he said finally. I'm choosing the person who's strong enough to break what I couldn't break. That happens to be her. Isadora's voice softened. I love you, Benji. I've always loved you. But love doesn't mean protecting you from consequences. Sometimes love means making sure you finally understand what those consequences are. The dinner that followed was surreal. They ate food that tasted like ash, made conversation that felt like last rites, existed in a space where the past and present collided with enough force to reshape the future. The housekeeper brought course after course, each one prepared with care that seemed wasted on a table full of people too emotionally exhausted to taste anything. Isadora told stories from her youth, from before she'd married into the Floros family and learned what it meant to trade freedom for security. She'd been a painter once, had dreams of studying art in Paris. Alexandros had promised to support her ambitions, then systematically dismantled them after the wedding, convincing her that her talent was mediocre and her dreams were childish. I burned all my paintings the year Benji was born, she said, her fork moving food around her plate without eating. Your father said I needed to focus on being a proper mother, a proper wife. I believed him because I'd been taught that men knew better, that my instincts were wrong, that questioning him meant there was something defective in me. Soon felt something crack in her chest, recognizing the pattern. How many women had been convinced their ambitions were foolish, their talents inadequate, their worth conditional on how well they served someone else's vision? After dinner, Isadora asked to speak with Benji alone. Soon excused herself to the library, giving them privacy for whatever final words a dying mother needed to say to a son who'd disappointed her. She could hear their voices through the walls. Isadora's calm and measured, Benji's breaking with emotion. When they emerged an hour later, Benji's eyes were red, but clearer than they'd been in months, and Isadora looked exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with her illness. I told him everything, Isadora said to Suna as Benji disappeared into the bathroom to compose himself. About your father, about how Alexandros destroyed him deliberately, methodically, because he couldn't stand competition from someone he viewed as inferior. About how he forced your marriage as a final humiliation, one last way to assert dominance over a dead enemy. Why tell him now? because he needed to understand that his cruelty toward you wasn't random. It was inherited, learned, part of a pattern that goes back generations. Isadora moved to the window, looking out over Central Park where lights twinkled in the darkness. And because I wanted him to know that I'm complicit in all of it, I raised him in that environment. I taught him through my silence that women exist to absorb men's violence without complaint. Nathan picked Soon up from the apartment, having been waiting in a coffee shop nearby in case she needed an escape. They drove through Manhattan in silence, through streets that never slept, through a city that continued regardless of personal tragedy. "She's really dying," Soon said finally. "I know. She's giving me everything. The company, the power, everything Benji thought would be his legacy. Do you want it?" Soon considered the question. Did she want to inherit an empire built on cruelty and manipulation? Did she want to spend her life managing a family business that represented everything she'd fought against? "I want justice," she said finally. "And if inheriting that company is how I get it, then yes, justice or revenge." The question landed like a challenge. Soon turned to look at Nathan, this man who'd been nothing but supportive, but who was finally asking her to examine her motives. "Is there a difference?" "Yes, justice is about making things right. Revenge is about making someone hurt." Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. "I've watched you transform over these months. You've become powerful, undeniable, exactly what you needed to become. But I worry that the armor you've built is so thick you've forgotten how to take it off." "Maybe I don't want to take it off. Maybe I like being invincible." "Nobody's invincible. And the illusion that you are will destroy you faster than Benji ever could." They drove the rest of the way in silence, and when Nathan dropped her at the hotel, he squeezed her hand before she got out. "I'm not criticizing you. I'm just reminding you that there's a life waiting for you beyond revenge if you want it." Later that night, Benji showed up at the Connecticut house where Soon had returned to collect the last of her father's books. She heard him before she saw him, his footsteps hesitant in the hallway. "Can we talk?" He stood in the doorway of the library, looking lost in a way that would have satisfied her months ago, but now just felt sad. "About what?" "Everything, my mother, the company, us." Soon set down the book she'd been packing. "There is no us. There hasn't been for a long time. I know. I need you to know that I understand now. What my father did to her, what I did to you. Dr. Foster has been helping me see how I learned. To hurt people without understanding I was hurting them. I'm glad you're getting help truly, but your growth doesn't obligate my forgiveness." The words came out tired rather than angry. She was exhausted by his need for her validation. "I know that too." He moved into the room but kept his distance, respecting the boundaries she'd established. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Not because I want you back, or because I'm trying to manipulate you. Just because I am sorry, and you deserve to hear it." Sune studied him in the lamplight. He looked different than he had 4 months ago. Less arrogant, more aware, but there was still something performative about it, like he was playing the role of reformed man without fully understanding what that meant. She could see him calculating responses, trying to say the right things rather than simply being genuine. "I'm leaving," she said abruptly. "Nathan has asked me to come to Sydney, to help expand the maritime operations in the Pacific region. I'm going to be gone for a year, maybe longer." The words landed like blows. Benji's carefully maintained composure cracked, showing the pain underneath. With Nathan's company, as his business partner. "He loves you. I know. Do you love him?" Soon packed another book, taking her time before answering. "I don't know. I'm not sure I'm capable of love anymore. You taught me that vulnerability is dangerous, that trusting someone is just inviting them to hurt you. I don't know if I can unlearn that, even for someone as good as Nathan. When do you leave?" 3 weeks. Benji nodded, his throat working as he swallowed emotions he'd only recently learned to name. then I hope Sydney is everything you're looking for. And I hope someday you'll look back at this and realize you survived something that should have destroyed you." He left then, before she could respond, and Sune stood surrounded by her father's books, thinking about cycles that break and patterns that repeat, and whether people can truly change or just learn to hide what they've always been. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, the first of the season, covering the grounds in white that made everything look clean and new. But Sune knew that underneath, the ground was still the same. Snow didn't change anything fundamental. It just made the world look different for a while, until the sun came out and revealed what had been there all along. Chapter 10. The Choice. The hurricane arrived the night before Sun was scheduled to leave for Sydney, as though the weather itself wanted to mark the ending of something. Manhattan emptied as people fled to safer ground, but Sune stayed in the Connecticut house, surrounded by boxes of belongings that represented 3 years of a marriage that never really was. She'd returned to collect the last of her things. Books, photographs, journals her grandmother had kept that outlined decades of surviving in spaces designed to diminish her. The plan was to ship everything to a storage unit and then to the airport at dawn, but the hurricane had other ideas. The power flickered as wind hammered the windows. Rain came in sheets that turned the world outside into water and darkness. Sune lit candles and worked by their uncertain light, packing memories away, preparing to become someone new in a place where her history wouldn't follow. Benji arrived near midnight, soaked from the storm, carrying nothing but the desperation of someone who'd realized this was his last chance to say things that needed saying. "The roads are closed," he said, standing in the doorway of the library where she'd rebuilt herself months ago. "I heard you were here. I didn't want you to be alone if things got bad." "I'm always alone," Sune said without looking up from the box she was packing. "I've gotten used to it." They sat in silence while the storm raged. Two people who'd been married but never really known each other, who'd shared space but never intimacy, who'd been bound by law but never by understanding. "I spoke with Nathan last week," Benji said finally. "I asked him to take care of you. I don't need anyone to take care of me. I know, but I needed to say it anyway. Needed him to know that I understand what I threw away." "What did he say?" "That you're capable of taking care of yourself. That you've always been capable, and my mistake was never recognizing it." The storm intensified, wind screaming around the house, rain hammering windows hard enough to crack them. The power failed completely, plunging them into darkness, broken only by candles. "My mother died yesterday," Benji said into the darkness. The words hung in the air. Sune set down the book she'd been packing with trembling hands. "What?" "Peacefully." She'd planned it that way, had arranged everything. She didn't want to linger, didn't want the cancer to eat away at her until there was nothing left. His voice was hollow, scraped raw by grief. "She left me a letter." Sune waited, giving him space to continue or not as he chose. "She wrote that she was proud of you, that you did what she never could, stood up to the Floros legacy, and refused to be broken by it. She wrote that you deserved the company more than I did, that you understood what real strength looks like." He pulled the letter from his jacket, the paper worn from repeated reading. "She also wrote that she hoped I'd spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of having known you." The candles flickered in the storm's fury. Sune felt the weight of Isadora's death settle over her like a shroud, the finality of it mixing with the exhaustion of carrying revenge for so long. "I don't want the company," she said quietly. "I never wanted to own your family's empire. I just wanted not to be erased by it. Then what do you want?" She thought about Sydney, about the year she'd planned to spend building something new with Nathan, about the freedom of being somewhere her past couldn't follow. "I want to be free. From you, from this house, from the weight of everything I've been carrying. And Nathan? Nathan deserves someone who can love him without fear. I don't know if I'm that person. They talked through the night as the storm battered the house. Not about reconciliation, but about truth. About patterns inherited and cycles broken. About becoming people neither of their fathers would recognize. But even as Benji spoke about his therapy, about understanding his patterns, Suna could hear the incompleteness in his transformation. He was learning the language of accountability without fully grasping its meaning. He was performing growth rather than living it. "I'm still leaving for Sydney," she said, as dawn broke through storm-damaged windows. "I need a year where every room doesn't remind me of being invisible. Where I can build something that belongs only to me. And after that year, I don't know. Maybe I'll stay in Sydney. Maybe I'll come back and run your mother's company. Maybe I'll do something neither of us can imagine right now." And us? Soon looked at him in the morning light, at this man who claimed to be changing, but still approached her with the expectation of reward. "There is no us. Not in any way that matters. Your therapy is something you're doing for yourself. And it should be. But I don't owe you reconciliation because you're finally addressing patterns you should have confronted years ago." "So this is goodbye? This is me choosing myself. Maybe in a year you'll have done enough work to understand the difference between loving someone and wanting to possess them. But even then, I won't owe you anything." The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by wind and water. Soon left for the airport through flooded streets, through a city being reborn after violence, toward a future that belonged entirely to her. At the airport, her phone buzzed with messages. Nathan confirming their meeting in Sydney next week. Rebecca sending details about Isadora's will. Victor congratulating her on her freedom. And one from Benji. "Thank you for teaching me that some women break back." She boarded the plane without responding. The flight attendant brought champagne. The seat beside her was empty. Through the window, Manhattan spread below like a territory she'd conquered and chosen to leave behind. A year from now, she'd return transformed by distance and freedom. Would find Benji still working on becoming someone better, or would discover he'd given up once her witness was removed. Either way, it wouldn't matter. She'd learned that her worth existed independent of anyone's acknowledgement. The plane lifted into morning sky, carrying her toward a future she'd written herself. Zun smiled at her reflection in the window, seeing finally what she'd been all along, untouchable, unbreakable, undeniable. The woman in beige, who'd stood in puddles of broken glass, was gone forever. In her place was someone who'd learned that the greatest revenge wasn't destroying your enemies. It was becoming so powerful that their opinions ceased to matter at all. She closed her eyes as the plane gained altitude, feeling the weight of the past year falling away like chains she'd carried without realizing how heavy they were. Benji would spend the rest of his life wondering if he could have done things differently, if genuine change might have earned him a second chance. But Suna had learned something more valuable than revenge, that some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. And that walking away from someone who'd broken you wasn't weakness. It was the ultimate victory.